What?
Got a little bit of a long meeting, so. Sean won't be here tonight. He's coming back from Minnesota, so we'll go ahead and start with council meeting follow-up. Carter.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. I do not have anything by way of follow-up.
Great. Does anybody have any questions from last meeting, concerns, anything like that? Nope. All right. We'll move on. Ice arena expansion. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a follow-up discussion to a couple.
Oh, I apologize. I forgot to do that.
I want to say this could be as long as a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly, when we visited this last. We've had a couple user groups come and discuss with the council the possibility of expanding the ice arena. And as a matter of fact, the user groups were willing to fund a study with respect to the potential for an expansion. And that discussion drove some follow-up conversation once that study was done. And pursuant to that time, obviously we've had a bit of a break with this conversation given the impacts of COVID and those kinds of things. And furthermore, council said earlier in the year that having this discussion following the facilities update or the facilities study would be helpful as well. So here we are, and since that time we have updated the data that was originally put together with the consultants who we have here with us tonight as well, and they will be speaking here to us momentarily. A couple key factors that I think came out of the updated data that we received a couple 2-3 weeks ago that you probably picked up on. You'll notice in your memo that the construction of the expansion actually is proposed that it would cover its own expenses to the extent of even providing some relief to the current subsidy scenario for the ice arena, which I thought was a really interesting finding. And so if indeed the expansion were to occur somehow, the subsidy position for the city and ICE would actually improve. Not a whole lot, mind you, but it would improve. And you know, we believe that that would thereafter be in the neighborhood of 148,000 versus the 160, 170,000 that we deal with currently. Another key item that came out of the update of the data is with regard to what the proposed project could cost. You'll remember or recall from your study of this data that would be in the neighborhood of 11 to 12 million. However, like I said, we have the consultants here tonight to talk us through some of their updated findings. We also have representatives from the user groups here tonight to answer any questions that you might have as well, and maybe even potentially a proposal to potentially discuss, I hope. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I defer to the consultants to start us off.
Great. Thank you. We'll turn it over to the consultants.
Good evening, folks. How's everyone tonight?
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. And doing a lot of traveling in our business, it's always nice to be able to do these things virtually. So I appreciate not having to make that drive from Pueblo up to Casper. So thank you for that. As was mentioned, we originally did a study back in 2019 and were asked to, actually the report I think was done early in 2020, and we were asked to come back in 2021 for some revisions. I do want to direct your attention to the executive summary. That's really the nuts and bolts of what I want to talk about tonight. But in updating the information from 2019, I did have one oversight on page 3, and that percentage that's identified at 71% obviously should be 109%. So I apologize for that oversight on my part. But I do want to say that in conducting the update, we had the opportunity to walk through each line item on the expense side with the staff. So it's been fully vetted by by the staff. And staff even went so far as to reconfirm the interest from the user groups, many of which are sitting here tonight, to make sure that their interest in purchasing ice time and expanding their programs was still viable, and which it was. And of course, we did hear through the process that there's a strong prospects of a junior A hockey team coming to Casper, which is fantastic, and that changes the numbers a bit. But as mentioned, the second sheet of ice will reduce the general fund support required for the ice arena operation about $20,000. The reason for that essentially is that when you put a second sheet of ice on, we have found, it's been our experiences, that the expenses go up 40 to 50% for that second sheet of ice, and I think you're in there around 43 or 44%. And the potential for revenue is 100%. So that's why you see so many rinks around the country having two sheets of ice, because the economy of scale of having a second sheet of ice. So certainly our findings and working through with staff that this would be a favorable project for the city to take on. It would reduce the general fund support of the overall ICE program. And one other thing I would mention, clearly having the second sheet of ice does allow for the opportunity to provide events, hockey events, figure skating events, and certainly would have a positive impact on economic impact as well, especially in the winter months when there's not a lot of people traveling to Casper for tourism. This will give people a reason to come into the town during what's considered a slow time of year. So Tom Betty is not here with us tonight. Tom is with 292 Design, and he was the one responsible for updating the construction cost and program layout, but we're looking at the total project cost of about $11.5 million, according to Tom and his work. So I just wanted to make those general comments and see if you have any specific questions of me.
Any questions? Yep, Bruce.
Well, I guess I'm curious why anyone, especially a consultant, would think this is feasible to spend $11 million to add a sheet of ice that's going to bring our subsidy down. I believe you said $20,000 a year. So I can't imagine, in my brain, I was trying to do the math, how many years it's going to take.
578.
578 years to recoup that $11 million for our community. So I just have a really hard time wondering how you can find this feasible.
To answer the question directly, our task was not to, at least from the operation side, we were not asked to look at and make any recommendations based on the total construction cost. As I said, 292 is not here tonight. I apologize for that. But that's something, as a council, you have to wrestle with. The costs continue to go up in all sorts of construction, and ice construction is no different. But from that perspective, we did not look at it from a payback on the $11 million. And I'm not sure, maybe does the city of Casper do that with all of their facilities that are built?
Mr. Mayor, no, that's okay. The city of Casper, the last facility that the city built was Hogadon, which was essentially a replacement facility. And I couldn't tell you what kind of cost-benefit analysis was done back then. That's been a number of years now.
I was on council at the time, but I don't remember that, and I think Steve was too.
Right.
Can I have a follow-up, please?
No. Along the lines of the last Hogadon, basically it was to replace the lodge or close it.
Yeah. Right.
That was where we were, and the decision was not to close it.
Right.
So that was the cost.
Just as a follow-up, so you understand where I'm coming from, we have a responsibility to the taxpayers' money that we're spending, and we've got to be able to show a way and balance. And I look at, when you asked your question, it made me think of the Ford Wyoming Center. That generates $20 million a year in our community. This isn't anywhere close to that scale, based on the amount of money that we'd have to spend to get it there. I'm not trying to drive a stake in this before it gets started. I'm just trying to be very, very real. And what I heard you portray to us was, this is just a good thing, and I just don't see how it is financially. But
I do have some economic stuff I can go over from that standpoint.
Mr. Mayor?
When they get to my point.
So, hold on one second. Jeff, did you want to say something?
No, I'll sit tight. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Steve, and then I'll come over here and we'll have some.
I got stuff whenever it's my time.
Okay.
Just that I do have some that'll answer some of those questions.
Great.
I had a
Go ahead,
couple
Steve.
other questions as well. Is basically in your studies you showed an increase in hockey of 6.5% nationally, and I guess I can see that to a point by the way the NHL is expanding with their new expansion clubs. But basically most of those are in the southern parts and the eastern and western parts of the U.S. The northern parts of the U.S. have pretty well been saturated with hockey to this point. So I'm wondering, number one, along those lines of, are we really looking at a 6.5% increase in usage? And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, in your study as well, you were quoted as basically this new facility would, for prime time ice, would only have a 38% utilization, which that also concerns me, spending this kind of money for a 38% utilization.
The utilization rates, actually, we are pretty conservative. I think they're closer to 50% with the junior A team coming in. But there's two ways of looking at that, and that you raise a legitimate question. One way to look at is, yeah, it's only, maybe 50% of capacity, but on the flip side of that, you also have a 50% growth opportunity for the programs that are using the Casper ice rink. And again, I will defer to the Youth Hockey Association. I know that through USA Hockey, they've got programs that are trying to build more interest with free mite play, mile high mites, and other programs. So they are really doing diligent work to try to build the hockey numbers. And hockey is coming back after COVID, like a lot of activities. Numbers went down a bit, but what we're hearing, and I'm doing a couple other ice arena projects, is the hockey associations are reporting that the numbers are starting to come back up.
Kyle.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Jeff. You essentially made the observation that I was going to make, which was that that's current demand is the 38 to 50%. That's not even taking into account the growth potential and everything. So I do think that's important to note. And I also, I guess, sorry, I'm probably just spinning my wheels a little bit, but I am curious to know more about the economics. It sounds like we have some of that that'll come from elsewhere. Not really a question for you. Sorry, I'm lost. I don't know what I want to ask right now. Go ahead.
Amber.
Well, I would
Go ahead,
say
Jeff.
that from an economic impact perspective, I don't see any reason why the tournaments and activities would not generate excess of $2 million a year in economic trade, perhaps even closer to $3 million. But I realize that's not $21 million for a different facility in the community, but it's still contributing to the economic health of Casper.
Amber.
Thank you. On a slightly different topic, I'm not seeing anything about projected maintenance costs over time, projected future capital expenses. I see the initial capital expenses, but nothing, what it looks like in 5, 10, 20 years. And as we're looking at our facility study and the current maintenance burden for the city, I would want to know how this would play into that once the facility's not new anymore.
Jeff, did you, not to put you too much on the spot, do we know any long-term as far as the cost of maintenance, upkeep, those kind of things? I don't know if you have answers to those.
Well, I mean, there's a couple different ways of calculating that, Mayor. I mean, we have some clients that'll look at it and say, okay, this building's gonna last 50 years, and they'll put an amortization schedule together for a 50-year period, and that's what they try to do. In this particular case, not knowing what those numbers were or the philosophy of the city, if you notice, we put a capital replacement fund in the operating budget. And our thought with that is that you would start year one, you would start putting money aside so that when it comes time to, buy a new Zamboni 10 years from now, you have a pool of money, the resources to go ahead and purchase that. So we did try to build that into the budget so that overall it was a proactive approach to capital maintenance instead of just kicking the can down the road.
Jeff, our city manager had a follow-up question real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Jeff, you're saying that the annual expense figure does include some put away as it relates to a perpetual care type fund?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I wasn't worried. Thank you.
Go ahead, Amber.
Yeah, just follow up, is that in this report? I didn't see it in the report, so I was just.
Jeff, so
It's in the average year.
Councilmember Pollack asked if it was in the report, but it sounds like you built it just into the budget itself.
That's correct.
Okay.
So do we know?
I'll try to find it here for you so I could direct you to the appropriate page. Sorry, I'm scrolling through the report.
You're good.
It'd be interesting to know what percentage of that annual expense rate figure is actually the perpetual care part of it.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
I thought it was like, maybe staff can help out on this. I thought we were talking about 60,000, or did we take that out as we put this last revision together?
Zulima.
Mayor, I believe that we actually took that out of the annual operating expense. Now, it may have remained in the capital costs. I know that it's not particularly an apples to apples comparison, but I can tell you, and I'll have Phil and Chad confirm, but the original ice arena was constructed in mid-80s?
1985.
85. So, and per the most recent facility condition assessment, of course, that we just had, the capital needs through 2027 was forecasted at $3 million if we had to replace all of the expired systems. Now, we have since, in our 1/17 ask, made a specific request related to the ice arena of about $100,000, which we think will get us to the point where we can evaluate all of those systems and extend the life out accordingly, make replacements as needed. Certainly, I mean, even right now, we're replacing the arena lighting, and just as recently as earlier this year, replaced some of the exterior doors with automatic opening doors. So we have been making some incremental improvements to some of those less critical systems, and of course, just added a whole ammonia system for the possibility of an expansion later. But 22 years later, we're looking at about a $3 million investment if we were to replace all of the systems.
Thank you, Zulima. So I think what I'll do now is I'll move to the Hockey Association here in Casper.
Okay.
And if you wanted to maybe talk just briefly about some of the budgeting, I think
Sure.
Council may have some of those questions. Lisa, did you have something you were looking at? No.
So I kind of wanted to, I think in general, go through and try and bounce off a little bit of what the report had, and then kind of where we're at. Some of, one of the things that's been touched on a little bit is, the estimates within the study are honestly pretty conservative. The 38% to 50% usage, that's like day one when the ice opens. And to me, that's a pretty critical number to make sure everybody understands, because we're at the point right now where there's no opportunity for growth because there's no more ice time. And I mean, you've got user groups like Team Wyoming. They just went from 3 teams to 7 teams. They would eat up, I mean, weekends, weeks of ice. I mean, if there was ice time available. They, you know, for example, even that particular group, when they came here, you know, for their tryout weekend, had 250 kids that participated in the tryouts. A little bit of an example of just the growth in of hockey within Wyoming. That group was around, I think, about 150 kids 2 years ago that tried out for, or actually less than that, probably around 120 kids that tried out for Team Wyoming 2 years ago. It's been interesting to me as a parent and as a participant, or I guess as a parent, but then also being involved in a lot of this ice stuff the last 4 years, has been to see that interest in kids playing at a AA hockey level go almost double in 2 years. Shows the desire for kids to be on the ice more, exceed or play at a higher level, play travel in many cases, for example. So the one thing that's I guess not particularly noted, but within the revenues for the expansion to the second sheet of ice, it accounts for approximately 7 to 8 additional tournament events, and that may be Team Wyoming, it may be Cutthroat Hockey, which is another travel hockey organization, jamboree stuff through Casper Hockey, figure skating, curling, stuff like that. It accounts for 7 to 8 more tournament type events. I used way back 4 years ago when we presented this the first time, the Casper Visit Casper economic impact calculator that they have. And a small event of that nature, usually it's about around 5 teams, with being here probably 3 nights in Casper, but 5 teams come, or 4 teams coming in, 1 Casper team playing, generates about $100,000 of economic impact to the community. Now, most of these actually, if you bring in, for example, we had the first Gold Cup tournament that we had. That was a 14-team tournament that we did 2 years ago. Was the first annual one of those that we did. Then that was $236,000 just in that 3-day tournament weekend that tournament brought in. Now, a little bit, because I know Councilman Cathy last time mentioned a little bit as far as direct dollars to Casper, you know, tax dollars or whatever. And I didn't have a good response at that point in time, but we bought 60 hours of ice that weekend, which was $10,000 that went directly to the ice rink in a 3-day weekend. That probably brings in $3,000 to $4,000 in concessions in that type of weekend, along with, you know, the tax dollars from the $236,000 of community impact. So when you take the variety of tournaments that can be or conducted, that 7 to 8 tournaments that are already accounted for in that 38% of additional usage, it has a direct economic impact approaching $1 million a year. So, you know, it is significant, and when we really look at the opportunities to invest money, I mean, in Casper, there aren't a lot of things that we can put money into that bring an economic impact. You've got the event center, you got David Street Station, things like that. But the other big one is youth sports activities, because it's something that does absolutely bring people to the community. There's not a lot of things other than those items that you can do that with. So, you know, and that portion of it, one of the reasons that we really started looking at a lot of the, getting a second sheet of ice too, besides the demand that we were already seeing, is that there's in every sport, from the youth standpoint, there's growth in travel. And that number, at least from the studies I've seen, is about 10% a year. I mean, from when I was a kid, I maybe spent 5 nights in a hotel room when I was growing up playing youth sports. And I spend, I don't know, 100 nights a year between hockey and baseball right now, traveling to play in different sports. It's that culture change is significant, and we are in a unique geographical location and just an area here especially to take advantage of a lot of that if we have the facilities for people to come to. So that's really our big driver behind interest in it, besides the demand that we have from Casper Hockey is, I mean, we can use more ice than is available right now, just ourselves. And then when we look outside of that, because obviously it's something that has to be justified, across the board, then we start looking at, well, what other opportunities are there for that ice to be used? So you start out with the 38% demand, and then you start looking at some of the other opportunities that it's low-hanging fruit to fill the rest of that ice time. And I mentioned that the Team Wyoming growth in the past couple of years. There's right now we have 2 Team Wyoming tournaments. There's one that's a 9/11 Memorial Tournament that started last year, and then there's one that's in the spring. It's an 18U tournament. Very easily we could host another 3 tournaments, whether it's a 16UA tournament, 14UAA tournament. They have 12UA, 12UAA, 14UA, 14UAA, all the way through 18UAA teams right now. And if we had the ice available, we could easily schedule 3 more tournaments. That's not included in the numbers that were in the 38% usage. Each one of those tournaments, if you figure they bring in approximately $100,000 of economic impact, like I mentioned before, individually. You schedule 3 of those, there's $300,000 in a year. I mentioned the World Cup tournament that we already did before. That's easy to expand on. If you have 2 sheets of ice, it doesn't take, it just takes a few more phone calls to get from 14 teams to 25 teams, which takes that $236,000 of economic impact to $400,000 pretty easily. Also takes the ice time that we can purchase from $10,000 to $17,000 in a weekend. As Chad can probably attest to, even the summertime usage of the ice rink, there's almost no time that's available right now. Very, very little. If you try and schedule practice time on weekends, there's no time available. You go in there anytime during the day, there's 20 kids on the ice anytime, at least, and doing weekly camps, things like that. So weekly camps, we can add more of those. We can add more weekend camps. And those are all in addition to anything that's included in the 38%. Additional stick and puck opportunities. Even we've got teams like Douglas and Riverton that don't get ice until November or December. They could rent ice. A lot of different opportunities, low-hanging fruit, like I mentioned. It doesn't take long before you get to an additional $1 million of community impact, beyond what we've already looked at within the 38%. So lastly, I think, especially from where we're at, we want to really try and just push to figure out a direction that we're going. And we've spent a lot of time, like I said, I think COVID obviously interrupted some of this, but we've been working on this for 3.5 to 4 years now. And our big thing is to come to an agreement just in how we want to move forward. We talked a little bit last time. We're prepared to come forward with some dollars to help out with the ice rink. We've got donors that will help out. It's just been identifying, where's that breakdown. And I think maybe to start out at a level of, either we go higher or lower or figure out where we want to be around it. But if we as Casper Hockey or the group of users come forward with 50% of the build costs, will the city pick up the other 50%? Because one of the challenges we have is that we need to know what that target is so we can go get that target, and then also be able to have the donors say, well, if I put up this money, what happens? You know, we need that commitment from the other side of saying, yeah, if we get, $6 million to put this together, we know that that'll be, used to get the ice rink in place. So if you have any questions for me, that's pretty much what I have to go over. But
Thanks, Travis. Yeah, we got a couple, I think. Bruce.
I have two. One is, you mentioned the available ice time during the summer on the weekends, and from what I understand, the rink's not even open on Sundays. So,
yeah, it is most of the time.
last time I called and did my homework on this,
Yeah.
was told it is not open or available on Sundays.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead, John.
It's open for rentals, so we kind of exclusively open for Team Wyoming, cutthroats, who block out 6 to 8 hours every Sunday morning.
and then my other question would be, how many actual Casper kids does your organization or that ICE service? Not out of town.
Yep.
How many of our kids are actually serviced by it?
220 was our number last year. And that was one thing, I actually thank you for bringing that up, but our program was able to grow from 2020, we were at 183 kids to 220 last year.
Travis, that's one user group though.
That
you.
is just
so
our
this, the 200 is
and I don't,
those youth. So we're
Yeah.
talking about there's several other user groups.
yeah,
So it could be multiplied by.
At least two, I mean, because when you talking about men's league and Storm and I bet I can look that up. I bet I have it.
I was just curious because right now the one ice is obviously managing the 220, but you're worried more about growth and
So somewhat growth, but we're constrained right now. I mean, even at our number right now, we could very easily use another 13 hours of ice time. And I think the other user groups, when we did that, it was every user group just at the numbers they're at right now would purchase another 19 hours of ice time per week.
just as my last follow-up, I'm going to tell you I'm not opposed to hockey or anything like that, but I do think if you were to, and I don't speak for the council, but if you were able to come to us and say, we can raise 50% of this money, I think you're going to have a heck of a lot better opportunity. Because I just keep going back in my mind to thinking that we're, we were fighting to find enough money for streets, and this is over half of that. So, it's just a thought. You mentioned 50%. I would think if that was a realistic target, that we would at least be able to entertain it anyway, as opposed to trying to bite off the whole thing, because I just don't see
No,
it.
and from that standpoint, that's been our stance all along, is that, our expectation is to come to the table with, we've always planned on coming to this table with money. It's just understanding what that dollar amount is and knowing that, if we come to the table with 50%, do we have the commitment that council would pick up, or city would pick up the other 50%, for example? Because then that gives us the opportunity to really go out and get in front of donors and say, here's a number. And if you do this, we know we're going forward with this other part.
Jai.
Just in terms of raising those funds, do you have any sense of how long that might take to get that 50% match funding?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'd like to think it could happen pretty quick. We've talked to quite a number of people. The Wolds, in particular, that helped out substantially with the ice rink up in when it was in the event center. And so he's willing to kind of be the point person for helping coordinate all of that fundraising, I guess. And so that's a big help. And so I think it would. I'd like to think it would happen pretty quick.
Other questions for Travis? Other guys from
Mayor, may I ask a question of Travis, please?
You bet. Go ahead, Jeff.
Travis, what is the ratio of practice to games currently in the association?
I don't remember that number off the top of my head, actually.
The reason I bring that up USA Hockey has some, goals and objectives that they set for programs. And ideally, they would like to see at least three practices for every game that you have. And, when I talked to the Youth Hockey Association before, I don't recall a number, but it was lower than what the standard is that you should shoot for. Now, there's nothing to say you have to schedule to that. There are some associations that'll do 4 practices per one game. So I was just curious as to where you stood with 220 kids playing.
I know we're awfully close to the 3-to-1. One of the challenges that we've had, and why another reason that it became something important to us, is that we've got practices on Monday night that end at 10:30 for 14U players, and then for high school players, they get off the ice at 11 o'clock on Wednesday night. So, it was something where we wanted to try and remove. It was important to us to try and add the second sheet so that we had the ice time to where we could get off the ice earlier.
I've got Kyle, Amber, and then Bruce.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Travis, for all the information as well. I like to put on my black hat every once in a while, just so that we can all refine our opinions further. So I'd be curious your feedback on a couple observations I made during the study. One is on it's 15 of our work packet, between page 12 of the study. It mentions that adult participation or adult registration in Wyoming USA Hockey looks like it's down about 20% the past 7 years, and for the younger age group, 6U, 8U, and 10U, looks like the past 3 years has been a downward trend as well. I was curious if you have any, what would you attribute that to? Is that concerning to you? I'd just be curious what your thoughts are on that.
I don't think so. The interesting thing was in looking at that, sometimes it varies just depending on at least from the hockey standpoint, it depends on the boys and some of the age groups. I know my son's age group in particular seems like they have double the number of boys that they do below him or above him. So that could impact it. I know in any, when you look at the total number, you can see a steady increase. So that could be some of the fluctuation, across the board, or it could just be age year variance. That's because I was looking at that earlier, but I noticed at least the total keeps rising. As far as the men's, that could be something, at least in Casper, I think is driven by the time they have to play. Chad could talk to that just a little bit more. But
the adult leagues aren't registered with USA Hockey. We have one private league that skates on Fridays and Saturdays during the season. The rest of it is in-house, so they're not. We don't require a registration with them. And adult hockey is very healthy in Casper right now.
Thank you. Follow up if I could.
Bet.
Thank you for that additional information. I know there's a lot of hesitancy in the community as a result of I don't think it'd be inaccurate to say the failed venture up at the event center. I'd be curious your thoughts. Hockey's totally, I've never played,
yeah.
I've never watched, so I'm totally ignorant of everything hockey, but I'd be curious what your thoughts are on why that didn't work out. Why that didn't work out? Why was it that initiative kind of failed?
From what I know, and my son may be able to elaborate on that a little bit more from their experience with it, but the challenge was just scheduling and not the ice up there couldn't be up all the time. So from our club standpoint, we really couldn't use it because it was down during the week, or it was only, it was just pretty infrequent when it was up. And if it was up for the junior program to be playing, well, they were using it. We did have the opportunity to use it sometimes for camps or practices here and there. But that's really where we ran into the problem. It's just the scheduling. We certainly could have used it if the ice was up during the times that we needed it to be, but most of the time, if the junior team wasn't using it on the weekend, then it was down the next weekend for some other event to be taking place up there.
I think it was incredibly, I was on council at the time, it was incredibly difficult to get it up, time consuming, it was expensive to put it up, get that whole area put up, and so I think I don't think it was thought through very well, to be quite frank, too. as well.
Thank you. One last follow-up,
You bet.
if I could.
Mhm.
So I guess on that point, did this study or an earlier iteration of it exist at that time? Why was it that, I believe it was around $3 million, $1 million from Peter Wold, and then I think the city put in a couple million. Why was it that that $3 million investment was spent up at the event center and not, was this a part of that discussion at that time? Was there a reason the event center was chosen as opposed to potentially expanding the ice arena? For whoever
I would say
can-
that it was, and Steve, you were probably a part of that discussion too, more than I was, but I think there was, discussion was that, hey, that we can bring professional hockey up to the event center, and I think that was the hook, and that, but it just didn't materialize the way it could have or should have, and I just think they were having a hard time. Calvary had left, they were having a hard time filling that, and it just, and then it became kind of a mess trying to get the ice, you know, get to sit there and get the ice put up and all the stuff, and it just became very, just wasn't very feasible. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I think one of the other things to remember in regard to this aspect of the discussion, the event center at the time was being operated by the city. And it wasn't until after the implementation of the project that the city switched to its current operator. At that time it was Spectra, of course, now it's OBG and so on. And they had a very different view from an operational standpoint as to why or how the ice should be managed and its cost benefit, et cetera, et cetera. So that, as you can imagine, was a big difference when it comes to operating that facility and everything else that you mentioned applies.
No, that's 100% correct, yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I did find one thing in response to Councilman Nell's question about the users.
Mm-hmm.
When we did the deal back in 2019, the Casper Hockey Club at that point was at 208, which probably also, that number probably also included some adult storm users. Casper Figure Skating Club was 61. Adult Competitive League was 87. Adult Rec League was 95. Casper Skating School, I'm at 407 users. And middle school hockey league camps had 99.
So 900 to 1,000 roughly.
They're on this particular report.
Thank you.
Yep.
Amber, then Bruce.
Thank you. My thoughts based on what I've heard and looked at through the study at the moment, I know that has been significant discussion and will continue to be significant focus on youth sports in town as a revenue generating potential for the city through Visit Casper. A number of other entities seem to be sort of coalescing around this idea that youth sports have a lot of potential for Casper. And so from that standpoint, I like the idea of supporting this. I have a lot of discomfort around the notion of, like, we just looked at a capital needs proposal, much of which went unfunded through the next 1 cent cycle, without any clear way to fund all of the things that were left unfunded. And so I get a little bit confused about, like, how we justify adding to that burden, which to me seems like, even if we just look at the rec area generally, Parks and Rec, like, does it make sense to create additional capital and maintenance burden for that department when it just, we already have left it underfunded in this most recent budget discussion that we've had. So I think we should not, I would support this initiative from the standpoint of wanting to support the larger efforts happening around town to support youth sports. I would not support it from the standpoint of banking on it reducing our subsidy when it's only by 19,000. That is predicated on one assumption that I'm looking at right now, which is naming rights, which we don't currently have. That's listed as 25,000. If that doesn't come through, that one entity, we're actually increasing the subsidy. So I don't think we should. It's not a big enough increase decrease in the subsidy that I think we can count on it. Be swell. It looks like it, has the potential at least to put us in that neighborhood, or at least to break even. But I'd be very uncomfortable supporting it as a mechanism to decrease our subsidy, I would be more inclined to support it as a mechanism to support the greater push towards creating youth sports facilities in town, but with the caveat that it creates discomfort for me thinking about the things that are already underfunded, even in just that department alone.
Bruce?
And that's a great lead in, because I have two questions for you, Mr. City Manager. Considering that we have so many unfunded things, not everything that we have to invest in as a city has to make money. We all understand that. We're providing avenues for people to come in from out of town and make that money. We're providing things for our children to be doing. I get it. But when it comes to the burden of the maintenance and what it does to the capital, where does that put us? And the second part of the question is, before they, get ready to go start fundraising money and come back to us with $5 or $6 million, where would we get the $5 million to match them to build the facility in the first place? And can we literally take the extra burden of maintenance, especially with ice, which is more expensive than most? Can we afford to incur it? I guess before we go much further, I'd love the answer to those two questions.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, those are very good questions, and I would suggest are probably the golden question, or series of questions, if you will, that I would suggest really need to be defined and answered before you would feel comfortable, in my opinion, entering into an agreement with the user groups. And so pursuant to that, I'm going to kind of come around to an answer here while giving council something to think about here. Without a doubt, my suggestion would be that in order to really seriously consider an expansion of this magnitude and cost and everything else, I wouldn't want to come forward without a proposal that gives you the path to eliminate subsidy for the ICE program with this project. And so I'm saying your math really should be what your subsidy is now divided over what it is you're going to pay from a capital standpoint. So for sake of math purposes, I'm suggesting that would be a $200,000 figure divided over a $6 million capital investment and what that looks like. And in conjunction with that, you should have a pretty good feel with regard to the plan and the proposal and so forth that gets us to that point where your subsidy is being eliminated by a certain amount of time. With regard to the ice that would be sold, with regard to the user groups that would be participating, and naming rights and those kinds of things, because I think all of that is appropriate to figure into the approach here. And so if council is comfortable with this and comfortable with this approach, the proposal that I would have you consider as sort of homework to do and then maybe come back to you with the right questions answered and so on would be like this. First of all, let's get the math right in terms of what it is that your proposal should be that you would consider. And it would be just exactly along the lines I described. Getting rid of the subsidy, how we're going to do that, and then what that looks like with respect to the the investment that you are being asked to consider. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6, maybe it's 7. In that circumstance, I think we need to do a little more homework as it relates to defining the actual build scope. So if 11.5 is the cream of the crop, and I don't totally know that, to be honest, is it the cream of the crop that we want to build?
No.
Okay.
No.
And I'm not looking for an answer right now. I'm just saying that's part of our homework. We need to come to you with a definition as to what it is we're going to build or ask to build. And then use that as our split. If it's 50-50, if it's 60-40, whatever it is. And come back to you with that figured out. And then I think the homework we need to do is, okay, this is what we think the scope ought to be. This is where we think it ought to be divided. How long will we need to raise the money what would be the drop dead date that that happens, and then what would be the I'm out scenario where we determine it's just not going to happen, and therefore we're going to drop the project. So I think that's the homework we need to do in partnership with our user groups, and come back to you with a proposal along those lines if you have any interest at all.
So before we do that, I've got Lisa and Steve, and then Steve.
Well, just, may I have a follow-up,
Yeah, go
please?
ahead.
Just as a follow-up, I think this council, based on our financial situation, if somebody walked in this room today and said, I'm gonna build the ice arena, and we're gonna turn it over to you, we would all be like, how the hell are we gonna pay for the maintenance over the next 20 years? We're not even talking about a capital investment there. It takes me back to the Stonehenge thing, we're all wondering, how are we gonna maintain that, even if he gives it to us and we give him the land to do it? How are we gonna take care of the paint and the vandalism, the constant, you know what I mean? And that's on a sculpture that is not nearly on this size. So I'm just thinking, if somebody comes and says, I've got $11.5 million, I'm gonna build this ice arena for you, and the city will take over management of it, I don't know that we're in a position we could say, because we don't, I mean, those would be exorbitant. And can we incur them, like Amber said, with so many unfunded capital things now? So,
And would that be part of the homework you guys would do, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, it absolutely would, because at this point in time, what we think we know is that the expansion would pay for itself and actually contribute to some of the subsidy, not contribute, but help reduce, I should say, some of the subsidy that we currently have. So at this point in time, we think that would cover itself and maintenance wouldn't be an added burden. But I still think that should be part of the homework that we have nailed down when we come back to you to talk real solid brass tacks, if you have that interest.
Let's hold that thought. I'm gonna go to Lisa.
So that kind of leads into my question. So this might be for Chad or Travis or both. So I know that Chad has been working with different user groups, so I'm going to start with you. So what is the opportunity of, I know that you're expanding some programs, bringing in curling, extra programs, women's hockey, whatever. Is there room for anything like that to add to some of the programs that's already existing?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, we are adamantly finding ways to fill ice. We are scheduling adult hockey tournaments for the first week of October. We're running the Mile High Mites this coming fall. We're doing skating school classes. We're putting on spring, summer seasons. We're putting summer camps together. Anything we could possibly do at the rink, we are touching base on. So women's leagues, girls leagues, under 8U in-house stuff, beyond what Casper Hockey is already providing to the community in the Casper Figure Skating Club, doing learn to curl nights and theme nights and restructuring our program is totally in our wheelhouse, and we're working diligently to kind of get that ball rolling every single season.
Thanks, Chad. Steve Friel.
Well, I wrote a million notes, so I'm just gonna start at the top of the page and work the way down. First of all, I think that if somebody came in here and said they'd pay for it and build it for us, then we wouldn't know anything on it. And so I would just look at that as that's gonna be income that's gonna come back to us. We wouldn't. You still have maintenance, but you don't have to pay for it. I think when we sit here and talk about the failed hockey at the event center, hockey failed, Continental Basketball Association failed, Calvary failed, they all failed. We're not talking about professional sports here, we're talking about adding a sheet of ice, because I do come from a hockey family. My kids started when they were 5 years old and worked all their way up. And my oldest son currently is starting his senior year at Boise State playing hockey. And when he comes back here, he's the first person to go to stick and puck and practice on the ice over there when they have stick and puck. The one thing that I would really point out here, a couple things, is that the ice is always full. And senior, if I heard you correctly, it's still the same as it's always been. These high school kids aren't getting home till after 11 o'clock at night because the ice is packed, and they're paying for all this ice time, but there is no ice time left, and so you have kids that have to be back up at school at 7:30 the next morning, but yet 11 o'clock at night, they're finally getting to get off the ice. They still have to undress, and if anybody's watched kids with hockey, that's a lot of equipment to get undressed out of, pack up, get home, and by the time they get home, it's 11:30, 11:45 at night before they're getting to bed. The one thing I will point out is you have a user group coming in here saying that they're going to pay you, or they're going to raise 50 cents on the dollar to build this facility. But yet we provide fields for midget football. We provide fields for baseball. And just to throw a few names out, but when you look at the Lansings, the Brownings, the Wilsons, the Bryants of the world, the midget football group, it doesn't come to us and say, hey, we're going to raise money and help further our stuff along, or get more fields built or whatever it might be. But we provide those. You still have kids that leave this community, go off to college, and some of them make it to the pros. Hockey is no different. It's absolutely no different. So to me, the big difference here is you have a user group that's saying, this thing costs $15 million, we're gonna find 7.5 of it. And to me, that's huge. I don't know if anybody else, and maybe the manager can answer that, but I don't know of any other user group that's ever come in to do that. So I think the biggest takeaway of this is the ice time is full, the kids get home late. We're not talking about a professional sport. We're not talking, we could talk about how many baseball teams we've had in here, the Cutthroats, the Ghosts, the Horseheads. Let's go down the list of how many times they come in, they failed, they come back in, they fail again. And not to take away from any of them, but we're not talking about semi-pro or pro teams. We're talking about the youth of this community and being able to provide more ice time for this particular group with a group that will back us on it. So that's all I have to say.
Steve Cathy.
In your scenario, which goes along a little bit along the lines of Bruce and several of the others, and we're trying to reduce subsidy, let's assume that their numbers here are right, that right now, if we do this, the subsidy would drop to 148. Round it off to 150. What are we going to have to increase the rates on the ice to recover 150 a year? Or what are we going to get for sponsorships? Because that's the other thing, is if we tell them, and I don't even know what ice costs right now, but if we're telling them that ice is going to have to go from 10 to 20 bucks an hour, then are the user groups going to be able to support that and be able to take that burden on? Which that becomes the other side of it, which goes back to Bruce, is how are we going to operate it with all of our unfunded projects that we have, and Bruce and Amber, well, I think everybody around the table is looking at that. So I think that's another key aspect of what we're talking about here and going to the zero subsidies. So yeah, even if we do come up with the 11.5, can the user groups with the rate increases, will they come? Because like we talk about, if prices go up, usage drops, so.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's exactly along the lines of what I'm suggesting we should propose to you. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's going to be a mix of solutions. Rates are going to certainly be a part of it. I think selling ice is a big part of it as well. And so my hope is that by having this level of discussion through the lens of getting away from the subsidy business as much as we can, that really is how we should be viewing some of these projects from now on, so that we're not exacerbating the vulnerability that the general fund has had for decades. We need to hopefully fix some of that. So that would be what I would ask our groups, and we get together to put our heads together to try to put together in a proposal that you see.
Travis, did you have something?
Just to kind of make sure that everybody's understanding on the numbers I was putting out there in relation to what Councilman Cathy is asking there. The reduction in subsidy is like day one. That's That's without more Team Wyoming stuff, it's without more, bigger tournaments, that's usage that would take place, I mean, the day the ice opens, that's where you're at. So, you know, I mentioned the Wold, tournament that we had the first year, or 2 years ago was the first year we had it. That was $10,000, actually, $10,000 just in ice time that we paid for that weekend. So, you got another tournament of that nature, your subsidy goes down another $10,000. You know, you add like I mentioned, even just the Team Wyoming tournaments, they're another $6,000 to $8,000 of income in a weekend. So there you go down, and the subsidy goes down another $8,000. So it doesn't take long. You know, just that you had 5 tournaments in there, pretty soon you're at $100,000 subsidy instead of the $150,000. So there is some, I guess, to make sure I was explaining that part, that your reduction in subsidy starts day one with just what the demand is we have now. And the demand keeps growing. I mean, like, demand's growing like crazy, to be honest. I mean, like I described the Team Wyoming stuff, they'll eat up a ton of ice time here in Casper. And with our geographical location, we can draw tournaments from North Dakota, Montana, everywhere, because we're pretty centrally located. And they'd rather come here than go to Colorado or Utah. So that there's pretty good opportunity, I mean, easy opportunity to really reduce that subsidy even below the $150,000.
Steve Cap.
So the 10,000 you would plan on, basically, are you going to wind up taking away practice time versus tournament time?
No, the practice time stays the same. And that's just, we schedule a tournament on a weekend. That was a 3-day weekend that we rented 60 hours of ice.
That nobody else had rented ice time that weekend?
Correct, because we used it that weekend. But in this case, with adding the ice, then it's all dollars, because right now there's no ice time to be rented extra on the weekends because it's being used up by user groups. Yeah, that second sheet of ice, you put another tournament in, then there's, right now there's not room for expansion because there's not supply, right?
Bruce.
I just want to be clear that I'm not opposed to the youth stuff at all.
Sure.
In fact, one of your young men works for me, and he's already been offered a college scholarship. He's a sophomore in high school. He's that good in hockey. And it's because of the programs that we have here. So I totally get it. I got the cart ahead of the horse. I'm just more concerned about the money and making sure we can afford it. And, you know, there's my boys, both of my boys were collegiate All-American football players. They started in the midget football league in Lander that I started and ran for 10 years. So I understand the parental involvement. I understand the feeder programs and needing that stuff. I get it. So I'm not opposed to it. I'm just trying to figure out, way before probably I should have opened my mouth about where we're going to get the money, how's it going to happen? Because I'd love nothing more than to have 5 sheets of ice surrounding that thing and have 1,000 kids on it every night, honestly. But we just got to figure out if we can afford it or not. Yeah, 5, I said.
I turned to Card and I said, figure it out.
Well, and I you know, when Steve was talking, I think about the baseball fields and the soccer fields and the amount of water we have to dump on them, and the upgrading on the seats and the fencing and the lighting and all the money that we constantly have to put into these things. And ice is much more extensive. And so, or at least the maintenance is, you know. And so, do I want to see it happen? Gosh, yes, I do. And like the mayor said earlier, you know, I don't know that the event center was thought out in the right way when they brought that ice, you know, because you set up this ice and now you got a concert on Friday night. It's got to be tore back down and put back up, and that's really not conducive to practicing and everything else. So if we do it, I just want to make sure we can afford to do it and make it work. And if it's supporting 1,000 kids in this community, I'm all for it. We just got to find a way to try to make it work, I guess. And I think your study, you'll come back to us with something probably to give us, with more teeth in it, to give us something to think about, is my guess. So.
And I think from our standpoint, I mean, like I mentioned to some degree, that that's, you know, we've been working on this a long time, and it's kind of to get down now and just, I mean, hash it out. Where do we got to be? You know, where does this have to be? Where does this have to be yes, or maybe it ends up no ultimately. But, you know, to really come, yeah, I don't think no is going to be the answer one way or the other, just because the demand's not going away. And the demand's not, I mean, whether it's population growth or just youth sports increasing, I mean, the demand's just gonna continue to grow one way or the other, so, you know, I think it's something hopefully we can get done one way or the other, but it's figuring out and hashing out how's that.
Well, I think time would probably be, follow-up, sorry. I would think time is more of the essence than not, because if another community in our state comes up with this and gets it done before us, we're gonna lose all of this. And so I'm assuming that there is a time restraint on this at some point, so.
Amber, and then I think we should go start moving forward.
Carter, if you can, you don't have to answer this now, but if you could include in the next bit of information we get about this, a reminder about what the current ICE subsidy has been and like a 5-10 year historical on it, just where it's trending. 'Cause I feel like we talk a lot about things that will decrease our subsidy, and I've only seen a couple of successful cases of that happening, and so I'd like to get a sense of what has the subsidy trend been over the last however
3
many
years?
3, 5, 10. Your personal tracking?
Yes.
The vice mayor snuck it in, and then I'll get Kyle. Then we're done.
All right.
Go
As
ahead,
long
Vice
as you
Mayor.
let me speak.
Well, Bruce almost asked the question, but didn't, or the statement you just made. Travis, there is not a city in this state right now that has 2 sheets of ice, correct?
Gillette has the Camplex, and then they have the rock pile. It's kind of 3/4 sheet, I think, is that other one, but, really you only play games at the Camplex up there.
And the point being is that you have, whoever has 2 sheets of ice, you're gonna get the tournaments. I mean, we used to travel to 2 ends of the state because you have kids in 2 different age groups, and that's the way it works. But it's 2 hotels and meals and everything else. But we would go to Utah and Denver, and you'd have, you know, people from Arizona, or you'd have Chicago or wherever. They all travel. And they travel long distances to play. So having 2 sheets of ice would be very beneficial, and you would get the tournaments that would come here for that. That's the point that I wanted to make, is that it'd be very beneficial, and really the early bird's gonna get the worm.
Kyle.
Thank you. I'm on board with what we've discussed as far as Carter putting together more information for us. My question was more, there was a statement in the study, it looked like feedback from the Casper Hockey Club. It was on page 18 of the study that said they're not allowed to advertise on the dasher boards, and so I was just curious why that was the case.
I think most of that stuff is, the working relationship with Chad is better than previous regimes, and I mean, a lot of stuff's worked out better.
Okay, so you guys are able to
I'd
supplement
sum that up.
your operation by advertising?
Steve.
One very quick question. Do you have, or can you have, or can you have tournaments and things like that in the summer, or is it basically gonna follow the NHL season? And the reason I'm asking that is we have terrible weather and we're constantly having roads closed. And so that was what I was wondering about, is where does that play into the tournaments and the out-of-towners?
So we absolutely can have them here, for sure. And actually, it's another area where we can really take advantage of geographical location and just us in general. Because one thing to maybe look at, even if how the ice time gets used up, is and Steve, maybe I'll help you here, but the summer ice the ice went down in the summer, maybe up till 15 or 16, I think. I don't know that for sure, but the ice didn't used to be open in the summer.
Right.
But now, I mean, it's full the entire summer, and you could certainly, but we're the only ice, I think, in the state that stays up year round. And so the opportunity to put on, have planted hockey camps, to have, just our own hockey camps, even to put on Casper, trained by Casper hockey coaches, Team Wyoming camps, Cutthroat, any of that stuff. You can do camps, certainly tournaments, and that's one of the big drivers, even from the Team Wyoming standpoint, is that they would like to host more tournaments. It's just finding the ice time, and you can certainly bring them here because they're traveling all over the place for summer tournaments for sure. Because it helps. with kids still being able to play in the state league if they do the tournaments outside of that season.
Thank you.
Thanks, Travis.
Yeah.
So if we can get a thumbs up just to move forward with Carter's proposal to go through and do his homework and come back. So, in that direction.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Mayor, council, and staff, thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Pretty good. Thank you, Mr. King.
Nice tripping hazard.
Thanks,
Travis, and we'll probably, the city staff will be in touch with you
Okay.
as they move forward, so you can be a part of that meeting too.
The Riverton team just played
Thank you all
Vegas
for your
last
time,
weekend, right?
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, they traveled that far to
Thank
play.
Okay.
Okay, moving along, ARPA fund grant applications.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you about this. A couple of you have had some questions as to what our plan is as it relates to accessing ARPA dollars beyond the dollars that we've been blessed to receive directly. These would be dollars that would be available at the state level. And indeed, we do have a plan. Certainly tonight, you're going to hear Andrew's perspective with regard to grants that he would like to pursue, and for projects that we are in need of in the utility section. I would also suggest that from the recreation standpoint, we have ideas for those kinds of dollars as well. And I'd like to have that part of the discussion with you here in the very near future, so you can hear Zulima's plans and others as it relates to taking that avenue as well. So with that, if I could get Mr. Beamer to kind of walk us through his plans in that regard. I believe our deadline is the 12th for this this funding, and y'all have heard that deadline here recently as well on some other projects. That's our deadline too. So we're wanting to move quickly, and certainly if you have questions or homework we need to do, that's why we're here tonight.
Andrew.
Mayor, council, correct. The deadline is August 12th, so next Tuesday we'll be bringing forth 6 different resolutions for your consideration. There is no cost to apply for the grant, so we're just going to throw a bunch of grant applications and hope at least 1 or perhaps 2 we're successful with. The state has allocated $50 million for water and sewer through the ARPA program. 3 of those we're looking to apply for projects at the wastewater treatment plant. One is a secondary rehab, 48-inch steel line that needs to be replaced. That's a $3 million grant that we'll be looking for. An MCC replacement, that's another $3 million grant. Some concrete repairs at the wastewater treatment plant for $1.2 million. 2 projects are with YDOT, one at First and Poplar, which YDOT bid out once before, which came in way over budget. We're applied for a $4 million grant there to relocate our sanitary sewer lift station, realign our water and sewer mains through that intersection. Poplar Street from CY to Collins, we also have an agreement with YDOT, predominantly water, but there is some sewer project in there. That's $2 million project? So I'm looking at Bruce, he's but total, we're looking at $14.4 million of ARPA grant applications that you'll be seeing next Tuesday. The last one is on Poplar Street between 25th and 29th Street, which is identified through our master plan. That's another $2 million project, give or take. So those are the 6 that we're looking to apply for the ARPA for the $50 million that are due August 12th. So, and with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Steve County.
Where's our match gonna come from?
The good news is, Mayor, Councilman, is that we already have money set aside for First and Poplar. We already have money set aside for Poplar Street between Collins and CY. We already have the design done for both of those, as well as the MCC and the secondary rehab. So we've already set aside money for those projects. So we would simply use that money as the match for those projects, and we will use our reserves for the other 2 projects.
So, as a follow-up, so basically, we have known these projects were needed, and we have built up our reserves to be able to cover these matches. So we're not dropping from Peter to pay Paul.
Mayor and Council, yeah, we're hoping to allocate ARPA money so we can reallocate that money to some other projects.
Right.
So that match money, thank you.
bet.
That match money is coming in at 15%, or is it more in some cases?
Mayor, council member, we were looking at 15% match on all these applications.
Okay.
Bruce?
How long does it take to hear back on those once they're submitted?
It's gonna go to the State Lands and Investments Board, and I don't know if they've actually set the meeting date yet. But I'm assuming they'll meet sometime in September, October, and let us know. Because the grants have to be expended by 2026, and it sounds like that's a long ways away. But by the time you get some of these projects out to design and bid out and finally constructed, that timeline disappeared very quickly.
And there's gonna be municipalities statewide that are coming for those dollars, right?
Every city, every county, every, special district, I think, is all eligible to put in for this ARPA grant.
Anything else for Andrew? Thanks. Oh, Kyle.
Thanks, Mayor. Not a question, just a observation. Looking at the criteria for the grant funding, it sounds like we've done our diligence and, picked the projects that would be most applicable. Like, projects already designed or in construction will receive a higher score. It sounds like we already have a couple that are already past design and, working towards construction, and projects with funding plans in place will receive a higher score, so it sounds like we've satisfied that. My guess is we're gonna be at a bit of a disadvantage being one of the more urban, populated areas, cause some of this is, lower median household income and populations of less than 10,000 and stuff like that, but it sounds like, we've put forward our best, done as good as we can, so I'm happy with that.
Mayor, council member, I'm hoping we get all 6.
Me too. I love it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Carter? Others?
Nope, that's, we just needed you to be aware, and we're gonna play to win.
You don't need anything from us at this point, until next week. Okay.
Could we reserve questions for Andrew later so that he has to stay? I'm just asking.
Andrew, would you be open to staying a little later for questions from
Mayor, council, would not.
Okay. Carter?
He and I are gonna have a meeting after this.
Don't say I didn't try. I'm just messing with you.
All right.
Appreciate your honesty.
All right, moving along. North Platte River Park number 2 subdivision. Carter.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, this is a follow-up conversation, and by looking at this exhibit, you probably know exactly what it is that we're following up with you about. The event center area, and of course the city-owned land surrounding the event center, at least for the most part, is what we're talking about here. Council is aware that for that teardrop-shaped property to the left of your exhibit here was of high interest for a private developer not too long ago that has yet to work out in total, as we all know. And that spurred some conversation with regard to, okay, what can we do to be business and or development ready for this particular area? Since that time, that we initially kind of had this exploratory conversation, we've also had a real key developer come forward and say, hey, we want to put a significant investment onto the event center property itself that would kind of complement activities at the event center and bring more business into the area in the form of the sports complex that we'll be talking about more on here toward the end of August. And so with respect to some of the latest hits that these subject properties have taken, we are actually embarking on a very exciting conversation, in my opinion, with respect to how to envision this area moving forward. And I would suggest are on the cusp of some really exciting development as we move forward into our near future, if you will. One of the things that council has also had the opportunity to peruse lately is with regard to a study for the Ford Wyoming Center itself, and perhaps what some of the future visioning looks like for the event center, and that's been a fairly recent presentation that council's had the opportunity to consume and are probably still consuming as it relates to the supportive report that came out. So, in light of a lot of those developments, a lot of that data that's been put together and so on, we believe that we're ready to take this conversation to the next level and have some input from you as to what you would like to see happen in terms of accommodating future development that I think is rather ripe right now for us to be discussing. Tonight is the chance to review staff's recommendation, and in light of a lot of this discussion that's taken place recently and is again about to go to the next level in its discussion as well here real soon, so that we can get your input, we can get your guidance, we can take homework assignments, if you will, and get these conversations moving so that we can be both business and development ready here real soon, because I think that time will be well invested right now. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn some time over to Liz's team to walk us through some of these things a little more acutely, we'd be prepared for conversation and discussion after that.
Hello, Liz. Welcome.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, welcome back. Mr. Napier did a fabulous job of doing a great overview of this area. Staff did look at the Ford Wyoming Center, and again, you all had tabled the final reading on our vacation of this parkland and our proposed zoning recommendation. And again, we await your decisions on this. When staff had recommended the light industrial zoning, which is the M1 and the M2 that you see on this diagram, we did so deliberately. We recognize this is underutilized property currently, lots of potential, as Mr. Napier just said, but we also recognize there is a lot of commercially zoned property available right now in Casper. And so whether we want to compete with that and go with a commercial zoning designation, or if you all are more inclined to look at that light industrial zoning and the fact that that M1 designation in particular does open up the opportunity still for hotels, if we want to look at that around the event center, any of the retail opportunities around that area. So that was deliberate on staff's part with the recommendation on the zoning that we selected, and also given the interest last year of the types of businesses from an economic development standpoint that we're looking at this property. Now, in light of this study, we have looked again at this area. We would like to see the approval moving forward to get the property vacated as parkland, if that is what council desires, to get it platted, and to get it zoned something, so that we can have it prepared for development should those opportunities come to us. We are also prepared to recommend that even after that step is handled, we would recommend looking at covenants. In this part of the industrial area that used to be, which is North Platte Industrial 1, this will be North Platte Industrial 2 with the plat. That area does have covenants. So everything along the area that we have with the Central Wyoming Counseling Center, Gruner Brothers Brewing, you've got a wall system in there, you've got some other properties in there. There are covenants that have helped protect the development so that we can see landscaping, we can look at nice facades. Staff would recommend, again, doing covenants in this area. It does not have to be done with this final reading. We would bring that back to you in a separate work session. So that is a recommendation. If council would like, also as indicated in the memo that we provided last week, if there is interest in doing a master plan of this area in conjunction with what the plans are that you all elect for the event center based on the Ford Wyoming study, again, if we wanted to look at a master plan in a development area, staff would recommend that we would look at working with a consultant on something like that. That's not necessarily something we would do in-house, but if we wanted to look deeper like we've done with the old Yellowstone district, do a master plan for that area. And a lot of the subdivisions that we have around Casper have got the master plan, even the former Amoco reuse site. So that's another recommendation that was referenced in this memo as a consideration on your part. So I will stop and we will be prepared to answer questions. Craig, who is zoning guru, and any other questions you might have.
Vice Mayor.
Carter, originally for this land, we were talking about setting it up for manufacturing due to the fact that land that potential people were looking for, we didn't have big enough parcels of land. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but with this zoning, we'd still be allowed to bring in manufacturing, larger manufacturing type facilities.
Correct. Mr. Mayor, some of the wisdom behind what staff is recommending suggests some fairly flexible classifications here, so that indeed, if you would like to see, some larger manufacturing, there certainly is the footprint available to make that happen. But you also have some commercial applications that would complement very, very nicely the developments potentially at the Fort Wyoming Center as well as the sports complex. So you've got some options here.
Follow-up.
And then just a follow-up question. You may not know the answer to this question, Liz, but across the road, across the Events Drive in number 1, I know that there was a chunk of land there on the north part of that when we changed the zoning on it, there was pushback from some of the other, I'm talking at North Poplar and Events Drive, that lot right there. And we had some pushback from some of the people in that area. Do you foresee that same argument on this land?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, again, this has gone to Planning Commission, so we've done all of our publications and postings and notifications, and no, we did not have any objections from the neighboring area about that. And I forgot to add, while I'm thinking about that, this area is again to remain park historic, so I want to make sure you also look at the text, so we're not planning to touch that with the development that is proposed in that area. Everything with fit is an allowable use for that. I'll check with the athletic facility.
Bruce and then Lisa.
Thanks. I remember, Carter, when we were discussing this, there was an option to put both of them either, I don't remember if it was both of them M2 or both of them M1, and you had told us about an advantage to doing that. The flexibility of one or the other, I don't remember which it was, so I'm curious now why they're separated again into two different.
Mr. Mayor, that's a fair question, and certainly Liz can sharpen the point here. But the brief answer is that with an M2 zoning proposal, you're looking at sort of a heavier application for industrial kinds of uses that you wouldn't necessarily need across the street on the M1, because that would be a lighter sort of industrial application there, which would also accommodate hotels. It would also accommodate mixed commercial kinds of uses. And so it's almost like a heavy to light transition.
But at one point you were pushing for them both to be the same. Was it the M1 or was it the M2? Do you remember?
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, again, all the uses, we know why we allowed the explosives is that allowance in the M2. But the M2 zoning does incorporate all the uses in the M1 plus the opportunity for explosives, ammunition.
So that's what it was. So why not M2, all of it, so that it's all included, I guess is my real question, because that's what we had originally talked about doing.
Mr.
Why
Mayor,
limit that 74 acres is my question.
Sure, and I think if council is comfortable with that sort of maximum amount of flexibility, that would certainly be a way to go. If you envision that heavy industrial, kind of moving across the street and into the area of the Fort Wyoming Center and some of the other neighbors in that area, then that could be a direction.
As a follow-up, I would just hate to limit ourselves. And like it was said earlier, we have commercial property all over the city that's available. We don't have a lot of industrial, and that's a prime area for it. I would sure hate for us to limit ourselves and miss out on a great opportunity because we miszoned that when we had already talked about doing it.
Sure.
So Liz, if council did want to change that to M2 as well, is that something city staff would be comfortable with?
Mr. Mayor, we would, and you all would make that amendment on the floor with that third reading.
So Bruce, do you want to keep that in mind?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Liz. Who did I have? Oh, Lisa and then Amber.
I think that this is more of a comment than anything. It's just, when we were first visiting all of this, we were talking about creating an industrial park just because of the land. That was prior to the new project being proposed to the event center. But I guess in my mind, I'm thinking that if you build it, then that might be prime land for more hotels and restaurants and things of that nature, of which will not want to be near an industrial park. Because then you're gonna have, I mean, like, why would you have an explosives or whatever, you know, or an oil field company next to a family-friendly hotel kind of a thing. So, just because I can kind of almost envision that whole area just expanding into just more hotels and restaurants for the city to have the opportunity to move more north, I guess is just.
There's, I think, Carter had a follow-up with that.
Mr. Mayor, I think you're making a good point. I've had the opportunity to sit in on a number of design meetings as it relates to the sports complex side of this conversation. And one thing that the consultants are saying very consistently is that with a building of that scope and influence and so on, it is very natural for hotels and commercial entities and restaurants and retail and so forth to follow very closely on the heels of a development like that. And so I think your point is well made, because that will invariably be some of the application that council will want to consider as landowners in this project area.
You can follow up, yeah.
My only follow-up would be, before we limit ourselves on the possibility of bringing in even if it is explosives, a business that's gonna provide jobs for our community, that's gonna happen way before we ever spend $113 million to build a complex onto that event center. You know it and I know it. So,
He's talking about the sports facility.
I'm talking about that sports facility, yeah.
They're talking about that.
Yeah, that's not us paying for anything.
Oh, I thought that's what you were talking about.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I am speaking more along the lines of the sports complex side of it that our private partners are anticipating for,
Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, then, just as a follow-up, we might want to keep in mind too that we have an obligation to every other hotel and restaurant in this town, and the amount of commercial property that's sitting available for them to continue on with that as well, before we just pass up opportunities to provide jobs for people. We can have both, and this is a perfect opportunity for us to do that. And if we do make them both M2, they can still put a hotel there. And I've been down to Denver where there's hotels right next to heavy industrial, you know, so I just would really, I guess, not like to see us limit ourselves, if you will.
I think too, what we can do is, if someone wants to bring that amendment up at the council meeting next week, to do that, we can hash it out on discussion as well. And so have that on those things and vote on it too, so.
Mr. Mayor, as far as the other point of direction, if you all would consider the covenants to give us direction, if that's of interest to you, that would be one of the hanging questions out there that staff
Tonight, you
would
want
like.
some direction.
I'll wait till next
You can wait till
week's
next week.
decision, or whenever we get
Okay.
back on the agenda. It's not on for next week, so,
Gotcha.
but we would just like some direction on that.
Amber.
Can you tell me, you're mentioning in the memo the industrial park on Wilkins Circle, which you referenced, what's the zoning there?
Industrial.
That's the question. You got it.
Sorry.
It is.
Yeah, community center, weapons and zoning, yeah, right. You think, C?
It's either C4 or
Okay, so I mean, for me, that type of industrial park, I can really easily imagine something similar to that sitting, you know, directly across from an area that we are trying to influence tourists and travelers and locals to come to for recreation and entertainment. Something like where I operate my business, which is a very different feel, I cannot imagine sort of trying to encourage people to come out to that sort of type of place for recreation and entertainment. So I actually do like the idea of limiting it because it makes it easier for us to have some standing for what goes where. This is a lot of space for M2 that's already proposed, so I don't really think that we need to expand M2 all the way across. That can be done after the fact too if we get a business that, makes the case for why it should be, but, I think that because of the nature of that area and the type of traffic we're trying to encourage there, I do think it really matters what ends up across the street there.
Do you want to follow up to that comment, Steve, or Bruce?
If I may, one of the main reasons I was pushing to make them both M2 is because we literally had one company that was going to take that entire spot, and it would be gone, and then there's no more M2. So that's why, yeah, they were going to take that whole piece and some more north, I think, eventually, that we didn't even own. Isn't that right, Carter? Am I remembering this correctly? Without saying too much?
Mr. Mayor, at the very, very least, they were going to take up a majority of that teardrop shaped property with build out expectation for more property north.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of that towards the events drive is probably not as available in terms of build out potential, but nonetheless they were at the very least going to take a lot of that property.
Well, just before I forget, and I promise I'll be done. As far as the covenants go, I know you asked for that. I would really like to see us stick to what we already have in that area, aesthetically pleasing landscaping, things like that, so that we don't have a metal shop put up there and right across from our event center. So I would think we would want to stay with the theme that was already developed below there. My opinion, anyway.
Steve Cathy and then Steve Friedel.
The M1, M2, it's a short matter of going back to P&Z to change the M1 to an M2. If a big company like Bruce is talking about would come in, I don't see that as being a major hindrance to stopping anything. I think it does allow some sense of stability potentially for hotel, motel, restaurant people coming in. If that stays as an M1, that they aren't going to have, you're not going to be building a Fab Tech next to them, okay? Nothing against Fab Tech, okay? So, but I think that goes along with that. My next question though is, we're rezoning all of this property. We still own a lot of property to the east of the event center, is that correct? Because we're talking about actually just east of where it says, well, where it used to say 3 Trails Drive. Yeah, there you go. Just east of there and south of that little building is where we're talking about expanding the parking and things if the sports complex goes in there, is that correct? Okay.
That's fair, yes.
And then we would have to rezone that. Is that park historic as well?
That's fair, yes.
You know what I'm thinking about. Okay.
Vice Mayor, I'll get to you first. Hold on.
Well, again, initially, we put this up here, we were looking at this land of having larger scale pieces of land available, because when you try and draw in larger companies, manufacturing companies, or whatever it might be, we have 5-acre parcels. We have just small ones. We don't have large ones like this. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is just because it says industrial doesn't mean we're building, a refinery or we're not, I think you could look at, what's the development down in Cheyenne on the south side?
Lead.
But they,
Is that lead?
Swan Lake.
Swan Lake, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So something similar to this, it has very large parcels of land, and they have people like Microsoft that's come in, and you've got a distribution center, I believe, for is it Amazon or Walmart? Walmart.
Oh yeah, Walmart.
That's what this is really meant for. It's not really, so I guess the main comment I want to make is I'm all behind hotels and restaurants coming in, but then you start chipping away at the very reason that we're trying to do this is to have mass amounts of land that a big company could come in and buy that land and build. And when we say, okay, well, we'll have this, but we want to allow hotels and restaurants, well, pretty soon 74 acres becomes 40 acres, becomes 20. And now we're right back where we began, because we can do that anywhere in town. So I'm just saying, the idea behind this was a business park, and I would just hope that we can look at keeping it that way. Just because it says industrial doesn't mean it's going to turn into a metal oasis.
Yeah, Bruce.
And that's exactly the point I was gonna make, so thank you. Because, and I tried to say it earlier, Steve just said it better. We have hotels and we have restaurants and we have places for those and we have land available for those. We don't have industrial areas of this size. And just FYI, at M1, FabTech could put it right there in M1. They don't have to be M2 to put it there. So we're worried about a hotel being next to FabTech. I'm more worried about getting FabTech in there or a company like them.
Sure.
We've got hotels. We've got room to build more hotels. They don't need to be in an industrial area. If they want to be, fine, but that's on them. But we don't have this kind of land available anywhere, and this was our whole intention. And so that's my thinking is let's get it all M2 and let's open it up and get some businesses in here. So because if Walmart's going to build a distribution center, another one in Wyoming, we are the best place. We're centrally located to everybody. How they haven't came here yet is beyond me. But that's the perfect place to do it, you know? And if it's full of hotels and restaurants because the event center right there, we're not going to get them. And we don't have any other land to put them on. So,
Vice Mayor.
So I'm just going to ask a real quick question because it has really nothing to do with this right here. But Three Trails Road, the land to the east, we own that, correct? East and south. For future discussion, when we talk about hotels, I mean, that would be an awesome place to, if there was a section of land carved out there to designate that or zone that. And they'd have a great view of the city too, but that would be an awesome place to zone that for any future hotel development, and then we're not messing with what we're trying to do here.
Good comment.
I think, to the other question that was raised, should we develop a master plan? I think yes. I'm not sure we're on the same page with what this should look like right now. So I think yes, we should I think it's an important piece of land for us, right? It's a strategic, important piece of land, and so I think effort to come to a good consensus and a shared vision about what it ends up looking like would be well spent.
agreed. And do remember, it wasn't important until that company came along. Nobody ever thought about that twice.
Oh, I thought it was important.
Oh.
So Amber,
But predominantly because Trail Center, Fort Wyoming Center, those are our top two drivers of visitation and people that are coming into
True.
town. And now the youth sports, I think it's strategically important to us for a number of reasons now.
Touche.
So I had a side conversation with Carter, and I think be relevant.
Mr. Mayor, council member, thank you for that point. And certainly, I think, given the highly strategic value that these areas in question have for our future development, I think it would be a reasonable investment to consider that we do get some help in putting together a master plan so that we fully understand how to optimize all of this land for all the purposes that have been identified here today, because frankly, I think there's room for all of it.
Yep.
You know, and I think we ought to know really strategically where it would be best to place some of these things. You know, if we do like hotels and so forth, which I think is inevitable, you're going to need to consider. Maybe it is better located on the east corner there, so it has a nice view of the valley. You know, the Trail Center is going to weigh in. They lease a lot of land up there. That was surprising to me, actually, how much they have there. So I guess I'm asking if you'd be okay with us taking that extra effort to go through that process.
Do we have somebody on staff that has the ability to do this before we just go out and pay consultant money and sit on it for another 10 years? We're famous in this city about hiring consultants to plan stuff out for us that never comes to fruition, and that money's gone. Do we have anybody on staff that has the ability to do this without having to outsource it? That would be my question.
Mr. Mayor, I would certainly say that I have a lot of confidence in the talent of our staff team. And had they the time to dedicate to that type of analysis and work and so forth, where they weren't already sort of in a full plate scenario right now, I would say, yeah, I have that kind of confidence in our team. But it's more about workload probably than anything, to outsource and get that help.
Well, I'd be more concerned than with the amount of money that it was going to cost us to bet on the come. So
I can appreciate that.
So, Carter, would you need a direction from us tonight for that type of thing, or is that something down the road?
If you feel like you're comfortable with that type of direction and you're ready to support it, we'd be happy to take that direction.
I don't know how council feels about that. It sounds Bruce is a little gun shy. Everybody? Okay. That was enough.
I saw some
decision
reticent
or
thumbs,
no?
that's for sure.
Is there enough support for them to look down the road for a consultant to help us look for, I should frame this a little bit better, sorry, to help us look for ways for us to utilize the land the best way that we can? Yeah, Steve.
Exactly what you're saying. Can we look at what a consultant would cost in order to help us get this done? Bring that back, and then we can make a decision whether
Other
we want to
council.
spend
Sure, absolutely.
that cost.
Yeah.
that'd be great.
No problem, no problem. Absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, can we go ahead and get the third rating scheduled though, from a
Yes.
zone?
Before we do, can I ask,
Yeah.
rather than bring up an amendment on the floor, can we just talk about it? It's right here. Are we interested in having it all M2 like I am, or do you guys want to leave it where it's at? I don't want to bring an amendment to the floor and go through this same discussion when it's not fresh in everybody's mind. We might as well just make a decision on it now, and if everybody's okay with it, I will make that amendment. But if you're not, we should probably discuss that, I would think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a work session is, I would say that work sessions are probably better to hash out amendments, so we don't waste our time, you know what I mean, up on the floor sometimes. So, yeah, I'd be more than happy to bring that up right now.
Liz, is the only addition from M1 to M2, is that the explosives provision, is that it?
Your Honor, that's the big one. Craig, would you agree?
There's a couple of, just so you know, it's, you get all the uses of M1, but you can have an asphalt mix plant, a concrete plant, a gypsum manufacturing, heliports, airports, large equipment, sales and repair, manufacturing and storage of explosives. You can have a refinery, a rock quarry, warehouse, or sexually oriented business. Now, none of us want any of that. None of us want, but they still have to go through us in order to, before we can allow them to put a refinery in there or a concrete plant, or is that not true?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that's a very important point. Once the classification is set and people are acting within that classification and they've submitted a site plan along those lines of the zoning, your ability to, dictate how that goes becomes very limited. I would say that covenants are helpful in that regard too, if you have that layer on top of that, because that helps you to filter a little further than your zoning designation.
Well, and as a follow-up, they're not going to put a gypsum plant in there. They're not going to put a concrete plant. That requires a lot of water, and that's not available up there. So we're not going to have to worry about that. They're not going to put it in an airport. But I would be a little worried about some sexually explicit business right across from our Wyoming Center, and our youth sports complex, where our kids are coming in.
Hold on there. That's in M1 also.
Oh, that's in M. Oh, so I guess it wouldn't matter then. In my opinion, we go M2. So,
Steve.
Well,
whoops.
so I think if you move it to M2, then you pretty much open it up to anything can go up there at all. If we leave it as M1, if somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to put in I want to manufacture ammunition, then they'd have to go back and change the zoning itself. But it could be done. But at least it gives us a stopgap where it's not just guaranteed where, well, it says I can do this, so I'm going to do it.
That makes sense.
They would need to come back to us. So I kind of like leaving it the way it is.
Okay.
M2 and then M1 at the top. and
That
then
makes better sense. That's why I wanted to talk about this, to,
Yeah,
you know,
no problem.
thank you.
So you don't amend
That was
it,
a quick one.
everybody just-
Yeah,
I was like,
exactly.
no.
Well, or to find out why it's not advantageous, and that's a perfect reasoning right there.
So council's good with leaving it M2, M1?
Yeah.
I'm good
Okay,
with that.
sounds good.
And
What'd you say?
PH. In park your store.
Oh, parking store. Sorry, yes, and that one too. Anything else?
So the homework for us is to bring back some ideas as to what a master plan development would look like.
And what it would cost us.
Right.
Cost.
Very good.
And
Thank
I'm,
you.
and I'm just dying to get into the next
Oh
segment.
my.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, wow.
Good day, sir.
You have to recuse yourself. You can't wear that shirt on this topic.
What, cemetery rules and regulations?
No?
I thought he was telling Steve to recuse himself.
He did.
No, I thought it was, I'm sorry. I thought it was the trails, but it was the North River Park. I apologize.
That's just what we went
That
over.
was not, hey, I've already almost got in trouble for this before. I was not saying that. No way.
No, I was making it funny about just dying to get into it with the
Oh.
cemetery coming
No, I
up.
saw the North Platte River Park and I was thinking you're wearing a Platte River Trails and I was like, you have to recuse yourself. Oh,
This is from 13.
Cemetery rules and regulations.
Way to go, Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks,
this-
Liz. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
I do not think this will be an item that requires a whole ton of time and will probably give us some opportunity to get back on the schedule a little bit. We do have, we've been to you before where we've talked about rates and our pricing strategies and, you know, kind of the cost recovery goal and those kinds of things. Tonight is just to be sure that we're good to go there with any questions you might have, but secondly, to give you a real brief primer on some of the regulatory things that we have to deal with as well. And then we're ready to go to the floor for a full resolution and have you adopt this. So a few minor things that you ought to be aware of. And with that, I turn the time over to Zelina and her team.
Zelina.
Mayor, Council, thank you for having us back to talk about cemetery yet again. You know, we started this conversation several months ago, and the intention really was to take the 20-page resolution that we've historically had and simplify it for you. We talked about extracting out all of the policy information and creating a rules and regs manual, so to speak. And of course, we have done that now. The one key change, though, is that initially we had hoped that the city manager would have the authority to kind of approve our day-to-day operations at the cemetery and move us forward without having to get you into the minutia of all that. However, attorney opinion has been that really by state statute, only city councils have the authority to approve rules and regulations as they relate to cemeteries. And so that is why we were back in front of you saying, okay, we do need a rules and regulations approved by this body, and we are proposing some pretty minor changes with regard to the rules and regulations manual now as they compared to the prior resolution that you approved back in 2019. So really, to give ourselves just a little bit more flexibility and transparency, we wanted to make it very clear that the city manager has the authority to assign a designee that will manage the operation of the cemetery. That was already included in the definitions, but we've added it throughout the document just to be crystal clear on that point. We do have a sexton for our cemetery, and we expect that he or she would handle all of the daily operations. To give us also a little bit of flexibility on the operating hours, we're saying rather than establishing in our rules that we are open from 10 to 2, we will open 4 business hours per day, and that gives us a little bit of flexibility to adjust our hours based on staffing and other things. One of the other big changes is that we added a couple of definitions for items that we didn't account for before in our rules, that being primarily just our drop-off and our entombment. So because those things were not clearly defined, there was some confusion among our customer base on how we handle those. And so we added a definition and we added a paragraph to address that. So really, a drop-off is literally that. People are allowed to drop off remains, generally in the form of cremains, and then that gives our staff the flexibility to bury those or entomb those at our own timeline. We don't have to stand aside during a funeral service for 2 hours. It just gives us ultimate flexibility. So we're recommending that that be allowed in our rules and regs, and the rate, actually reduced to account for that flexibility in our operation. And then entombment, we just wanted to make it very clear that what you're paying for with an entombment into a mausoleum is actually the funeral services. City staff does not open and close the mausoleum. That is done by the monument companies. But people were getting confused about what they were paying for with the fee, because it was previously called an open and close fee, and that was a little confusing. So those are really the main changes. But I'm certainly, welcome any questions that you have or any direction that you have if you don't like something that you see.
Vice Mayor.
Zelina, as far as not having set hours and it's just 4 hours per day, how will that be put out to the public so that they'll know when you're open?
Mayor, council member, thank you. So we have our hours posted at the cemetery. They're posted on our website. We don't intend to change the hours. I just want to make that clear. But we don't want to have to come with a resolution amendment in order to do that if the operational need were to come to pass. So we're just trying to simplify it a little bit, but certainly we would let you know if we planned to change the hours, and we would make that well known to the public well in advance of a change.
Any other questions? Kyle, Amber, did you put your hand up?
I
No.
was giving a thumbs up.
Oh, you're giving a thumbs up. Okay, sorry.
Not
Kyle.
yet.
Yeah.
Uh,
Retract.
Now mine was just more to satiate my curiosity. So these proposed rate increases will bring cost coverage 46%, which I think is important for the citizenry to know. But I'm curious, where does the 54% subsidy come from? The general fund? It's not 1 cent, so it's just general fund? Okay, thank you.
Did that satiate you?
It did. I'm satiated.
You're satiated.
Get your thumb back out.
Thumbs back on.
All right, everybody good with it?
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Zulima. Thanks, everyone.
Man, you got off easy this time.
Thanks, Mike.
I appreciate that.
All right, we're about right on time. Agenda review.
Mr. Mayor, I can wait if indeed you'd like to move on into the exec.
Yeah, you want to just do
I'm
that?
happy to waive my
Agenda review.
discussion.
And
Yeah, you
okay,
bet.
perfect. All right, let me get my script.
So are we doing council around the table now or later?
Council, so we can adjourn right into an executive session. Do we have around the table stuff we want to share? Because I'd be more than happy either way.
Always.
Okay.
I think we'd have to do it now, right?
What's that?
We'd have to do it now.
Yeah, we'll have to do it now. So, all right, Amber.
Just appreciate all of your patience and flexibility in reaching out. I had to miss a couple. One,